Good afternoon. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Abby Jacobson. I'm the rabbi of Emmanuel Synagogue. Generally, when I speak from someone else's pulpit, it's not at their funeral. I am mindful that Perry has been my congregant and was gracious enough to call me his rabbi, but that really, this is his bima. This is his pulpit. And I am honored to be able to share it, though not under these circumstances. Next time, can we pick different circumstances, please? I think in speaking to everyone, I would like to start by acknowledging that most of us are still in shock. This was not going to be an easy road for Perry, and we knew that. And we knew that we would all be here to support him and love him through so many things as he has supported and loved us through things. We were definitely not ready for him to go. Eventually, over the next year or year and a half, we will come to dissipate that shock, to be okay enough to think about Perry and not have the first thing we think about be his tragic loss. But it is going to be a year of the first time he didn't share a certain Torah portion, the first time he didn't lead for the holidays, the first time he didn't run back to his office for just that one more book he was looking for. The first time, some of you knew him too. Ordinarily, when we go through those firsts, their first Thanksgiving, first birthday, first anniversary, for most of us, in Perry's found family, we didn't do that. That wasn't how we related. We did holidays and we did occasions, we did appointments and classes, we did schedules and concerts, we did opportunities and travel dates, and that's how we knew him. And we will make it through those times. And we will be blessed as we do to remember Perry's wisdom and his Torah, his talent, his beautiful voice, and his beautiful presence as we navigate those times when we turn to speak to him and find someone else at his pulpit. We'll begin with Psalm 23, first in Hebrew, and then I'll invite you to join me in English. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai roi lo echsar, binot deshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenahaleni. Nafshi eshovev yancheni, v'magele tzedek lema'an shemo. Gam ki elech begetz al mavet, lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha u'mishantecha, hema yenachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan, neged tzorerai, dishanta v'Hashem el roshi, kosi revaya. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni kol yamei chayai, v'shavti beveit Adonai, le'orech yamim. A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Our speakers will be broken into the three major communities that Perry served, starting with the Temple Emmanuel family here in Ponca City. May I call upon Board President Cindy Wigley.
I would like to take a moment to ask everyone to turn off their cell phones. I have checked mine and it is off, and unlike the past president of the congregation, my father, I will not be answering it on the Bema today. Rank has its privileges was a phrase Perry used when calling on the president of the temple to begin each of our services. I can easily say that the true privilege was being his friend. Perry came to our Jewish community in 1986 after moving to Stillwater. My parents received a call from a man that said he was a French professor at OSU. He heard about the temple in Ponca City and wondered if we needed someone that could lead services. Their response was absolutely. Perry came to Ponca City for the first time to lead a service, which was the Passover Seder in 1986. We were all thrilled and couldn't believe our good fortune. From that day, he continued to lead services here for the next 37 years. Little did we know how much Perry would influence our lives, and vice versa. It wasn't long after he started coming to Ponca that my mother, who was a realtor, found out he was living in an apartment and told him he needed to buy a house. Perry, in recent years, shared with me that he wasn't so sure about buying a house and having that responsibility, but followed the advice of a wise Jewish mother. He claimed that he would never have taken the leap that he did to live independently without her support. She then proceeded to encourage him to get his driver's license and a vehicle, and went clothes shopping with him, which I and other members of the community continued to do for many years. I think Perry felt the love, warmth, and comfort of this newfound family. So to return his love, he felt compelled to teach us spiritually. He encouraged us to ask questions, learn about our faith, and the path that we felt we needed to take in this journey of life. I remember the first time that he called me to the Bema to read the prayer before and after Torah reading. I had studied Hebrew in Sunday school growing up, but after my confirmation at age 13, I had become quite rusty. So, like a true scholar, he encouraged me to study and practice. Instead of learning by myself, Perry inspired me to start teaching Hebrew to the children in the congregation. Perry always commented that he is a traditionalist and would never shy away from doing the full Torah reading when we had a minyan or the traditional melodies for each song, even while modifying the services for our congregation who do not all read Hebrew. Each holiday and every Shabbat, Perry would share his knowledge during his talk. This was not quite a drash, but more of a lecture on questions weighing on Perry's mind throughout his life. Perry was a person you could always count on to have answers or thoughts about Jewish questions you might ponder. If you ever asked him a question that he didn't immediately have a response to, you knew that you were going to get a full explanation or perhaps an upcoming series of talks once he had a chance to research it. He was a person who was insatiably curious about a lot of things and never settled for Hebrew school answers. He did not shy away from the parts of Judaism that are tough for modern readers, such as sacrifices, and leaned into the parts of the religion that most would prefer to sweep under the rug. He shared with me that when he was younger, someone asked him why the Jews killed Jesus. He told me he couldn't answer that question, so he decided to start researching to find the answer. Over the years, he would present text passages, historical commentary, rebuttals, and occasionally unsubstantiated claims he found in the footnotes of texts for everyone in the congregation to form their own opinions on whatever subject he was lecturing about. His passion was sharing and teaching what he learned, and he often cited historic figures like Rabbi Abraham Wolf and Maimonides. His classic line during the Yom Kippur memorial service was that he could read excerpts from Jewish scholars' texts because he had no wisdom of his own to share. Finally, in recent years, he started dropping in his own thoughts and comments, which we appreciated and encouraged. He also shared many times that he prided himself in giving a talk with no notes. Often during his talks, he would call out one child's name at the service to pay attention as a test would follow, like the professor he was. Thankfully, a test was never given. He encouraged so many of us to challenge ourselves and study for a bar bat mitzvah, me included. This gave me pause to think about how many people over the years took him up on this task. I know he helped over 17 students of all ages. I can speak from personal experience about my daughter. He not only encouraged her spiritually with her bat mitzvah, but also academically. He would frequently call her the star of the show, because as soon as she could walk and talk, when I came up to make announcements, she also had to accompany me and make her own announcements. When I would periodically go to Stillwater for appointments, I always tried to coordinate with Perry to go have lunch. Invariably, he would have a task at his house for me, to change a hard-to-reach light bulb or filter or look at something outside that needed to be fixed. He said it frustrated him sometimes not knowing what to do. These moments really made me appreciate our community and how each one of us can support and help one another in ways that seem impossible to others. In the early 2000s, we started losing many of the matriarchs and patriarchs of our congregation. Our numbers were dwindling, so once you took a position on the board, it was pretty much for life. When my dad, who was president of the temple, passed away in 2016, everyone turned to me and said, "You're the new president." And of course, Perry said, "It's tradition." I was told that I had to continue the dynasty and l'ador v'ador from one generation to the next. Since I was still president of the sisterhood, when it came time for announcements, he would refer to me as the illustrious double president. He had such a good sense of wit and humor. For the past 37 years, we have relied on his steadfast guidance. We've enjoyed going to his house to hear him read the Megillah in Hebrew, learning how to shake the lulav and etrog during Sukkot, watching as he wrapped himself with tefillin and explained the purpose, sharing with us why we eat certain foods at certain holidays, and the list goes on. I've heard others refer to him as a Renaissance man, a scholar. He had the lightest touch on a piano and was a joy to listen to, a theater buff, a walking encyclopedia, the best Torah reader in the state, a mentor, but most of all, a true friend. In the words of Perry, I would now like to hand the podium over to our next volunteer reader.
And I guess that would be me.
It is.
And I usually don't stand on the bima. And it's hard for me to stand and not move when I speak. Perry was my rabbi. Oh, I'm Mert. The obit, yes, that's my work. So is the program today. And thank you for all the nice comments that some of you have made. Perry was my rabbi. He is my friend. He is someone that I will miss dearly every day of my life. I could make him laugh when I wasn't trying to be funny. When I would get a question from, I have a good number of, as you can imagine in Ponca City, good Christian friends who feel free to call myself or Cindy or Charlene or now Stacy and say, well, what did you think about this? And sometimes I could answer, this is what this Jew thinks about this. And sometimes I would say, let me check with Perry on that. And invariably, I would get questions every once in a while that even stunned Perry. For instance, last year on Passover, as we were getting ready for Passover, for Seder in the temple, I got a text from a friend that said, do all the Jewish men who participate in the Seder have to be circumcised? Now, Rabbi Abby? I didn't know how to answer that. And I was a little bit afraid to ask Perry. So I texted back, I don't know, and I'm not going to check. And so Perry saw me texting and laughing and said, what are you doing? Are you talking to Jeff? Jeff is our son, who shared Perry's birthday, by the way, and they bonded like that. And I told him, and I didn't think he was going to be able to start Seder because he was laughing so hard. And Perry didn't feel comfortable telling the entire group what I had said that was so funny and made him laugh. I would laugh at his jokes that he didn't even know were his jokes. When he was giving his talk, because he never gave a sermon, he wasn't qualified to give a sermon, he wasn't intelligent enough to give a sermon, and many, many times I would just say, oh, Perry, he didn't give himself enough credit. He didn't see himself through the eyes that we did, and that's a collective we. He didn't know how much he had to share. But he would, and I would ask him what I thought was a simple question, and I would get back a page of an explanation from every possible, and they would all be cited. That's why when you read today's program, you will find the citations when I quoted the interview that he did in Stillwater, because I'm still not sure about what comes next, but I didn't want Perry to be mad at me, and I sure didn't want him, if there is such thing as a haunting, I didn't want him to come and haunt me because I cited something. I know that's plagiarism. My favorite time in Temple Emmanuel is when Barry pulls up a chair, because he finally felt comfortable enough with us that he'd pull up a chair, there would be 10, 9, 7 of us, maybe 13, on a really great day, evening, and he would talk to us. His talk was generally a talk. And he had figured out some minute way of explaining to us how this story about wandering in the wilderness for 40 years is not the way we think of 40 years, or how long it would have taken, how long God would have had to keep the Red Sea parted for the number of people to pass that passed. And I, as a history teacher, Perry used to say, well, you're a historian too. Oh, no, I'm not. I taught history. I'm not a historian, but that was important that we understand that, and we loved it. I did something that I will always remember, in that Cindy mentioned her bat mitzvah. Her bat mitzvah was a tri-bar mitzvah. Charlene and Cindy and I studied with Perry for a year, because if we were going to have a bat mitzvah in our 40s and 50s or 60s, we were going to do it right. It wasn't going to be the quick go online and suddenly you're an ordained minister. It was going to be the same thing that Cindy's daughter Samantha and my son Jeff went through. And so we met with Perry once a week for a year. And it was the best day of the week the entire time we did it. But Perry, when I said to Perry, let's celebrate, we were celebrating the 50th anniversary of this building, of the congregation in Ponca City that had been here since before statehood, actually having its own building for services. And I said, Perry, we have to do something really special. And, well, what are you thinking about? And I said, well, how about if we have a bat mitzvah? We don't have anybody of the age. I said, well, what if Cindy and Charlene and I do it? And Perry said, well, okay. And I know what he was thinking, because I could see that mind working. Cindy and Charlene aren't going to agree to this. These three are wonderful. But they'll take me clothes shopping. We're not responsible for that orange and fall striped sweater. not our work. And no matter how many other sweaters we suggested or purchased, that one never could go away. And Zach, please don't pick that out for Perry to wear. It just, but anyway, we did it. We studied with him. We had our bat mitzvahs. He was proud of us in a way that made us think we were the most important people in the world. And nothing else about the anniversary celebration mattered, but that Perry was proud of us and that we made him proud. He's hard to describe. If you haven't traveled with Perry, if you haven't ridden in the car with Perry, I really am sorry for you, because that's where he opened up. I don't know whether it was just the fact that you were driving and he was enclosed, and you were either going to talk or he was going to talk. So he talked to us, and we traveled. I learned more about Perry than Yancy the day of David's service than in any conversation I ever had with him. He loved that young man. Dan's son David left us way too soon. And it was the only time that I ever heard Perry refer to his childhood. And he talked about his childhood, and it now is a blessing to me. And it was one of the hardest days I've ever spent. But I am thankful that I had the time and that the circumstances, I'm not happy about the circumstances, but that Perry was finally able to, it explained much of who Perry was, of who he is as an adult. And it was tough. Those of you who aren't Jews probably are still familiar with the expression that we use, may his memory be for a blessing. And I never really thought about what it was we were saying to each other when we said that. But when we say, may his memory be for a blessing, we're not simply saying, oh, we'll always speak of Perry fondly. We're not just saying, may his memory be a blessing to us. Jewish thought teaches us that when a person dies, it's up to those who remember them to keep them alive with us, to keep that memory alive with us, to remember the good times and the not so good times, to carry on the legacy that he left in us. And Zach, you'll do that, and your son will do that. And that gives all of us comfort. We do this by doing what Perry did best, by seeking knowledge, by pursuing the truth, by trying to find ways to show justice and righteousness and acceptance of all people. And so when we say and when we hear, may his memory be for a blessing, let's translate that really quickly to may we carry on the legacy that he left for us. It's an extremely rich legacy. And so may Perry's memory be a blessing for us and a legacy for us to carry forward.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Mert. Representing the Stillwater community, I call on Dr. Eric Ekman.
I always knew Perry had a wide range of interests and a vast network of friends, but I'm still surprised to be meeting and speaking with so many different people who seem to have been touched by him. And I don't know if I knew him as long. I didn't know him as long or as well as some of you, but I owe him an awful lot. Like Perry, I didn't get tenure at a job, and I was working as a visitor at a university and stringing together some adjunct jobs. And he hired me at Oklahoma State, took a chance on me, and it's worked out wonderfully for me. I hope he was happy. And a couple of years later, he negotiated a spousal hire for my wife, and we're here and are thriving professionally because of him and because of his mentorship, and I will always owe him that. And I'm honored to summarize some of his academic achievements. So when we learned of Perry's passing this week, along with feelings of shock and sadness, many of us lamented the fact that he really didn't get to enjoy his retirement. And we're all here together entirely too soon, and I share the sentiment, but I've given it a little more thought. He could have retired many years ago, but chose not to because he loved being a professor, loved university life, and was dedicated to his students, his research, and a life of the mind like very few people I've known. And he still has an office in our department and was in the office probably 2 or 3 times a week in spite of his illness. It takes intelligence to become a professor, but most of all, it takes persistence and energy. And Perry definitely had it. Most of us have that spark when we write our dissertations and can turn it on under pressure, or when we have a particularly good idea that we're fleshing out. But I never saw Perry without it. Because it was such an important part of his life, I think it's important we speak of his academic work now. And don't worry, there's no quiz at the end. So, it's difficult to sum up his work in the Department of Languages and Literatures at OSU because he did so many different things over the years. Of course, I've always thought his most important accomplishment was hiring me, but I'm a little biased and especially grateful. And he rescued me at a time when I really was wandering in the wilderness. I knew who he was before I applied for this job. The University of Michigan, my alma mater, had a lot of 17th century graduate students working in 17th century French literature at the time. So his name came up quite often. Perry joined the Department of Languages and Literatures, then the Department of Foreign Languages and Literatures in 1984. He had studied at Carleton College, worked as a teaching assistant in Strasbourg, and completed a PhD at Yale before coming to OSU. He had worked at Quinnipiac College and the University of Chicago. He was promoted rapidly at OSU, becoming associate professor in 1986 and professor in 1993. He was named Norris Professor in 2005 and Regents Professor, the highest faculty rank at OSU in 2011, and there aren't very many Regents Professors at OSU. Very few rise this high, and he was the only Regents Professor of our department. He also became department head in 1999 and continued in this position until 2015, and this is my 4th year, and I have no idea how he held on that long. That's truly impressive. I think, I don't know. But in addition to his work in our department, he taught for many years in the Honors College, and probably most important, it was where he was the cornerstone of great books for many years. Perhaps his biggest accomplishment was the creation of OSU's Phi Beta Kappa chapter, which required multiple applications and took about 25 years. Perry wasn't the only person to work on this, but I doubt we would have a chapter now without his work. He served as the chapter's first president from 2012 to 2019, and more recently as secretary. He was our most prolific scholar, publishing more than 30 editions and translations, and more than 70 scholarly articles since coming to Oklahoma State. And those numbers may be a little off because it's very difficult to count them all from his CV. It goes on for a long time. He was a scholar of 17th century French theater, so authors like Corneille, Racine, and Molière, for example. It's something like being a scholar of Shakespeare if you work in English. So these are among the most difficult and complicated texts in French, and they're studied generation after generation. So coming up with something new to say about them takes a great deal of work. Perhaps what has impressed me most is the degree to which he was treated as a peer by French scholars of the same period. French 17th centurists do not have the reputation of being a particularly welcoming group. For those already in the French Academy, and to collaborate with top French scholars on the weightiest texts in French coming from the United States is no small feat. It always truly impressed me. But we really shouldn't sum up his work only with numbers. France had a significant number of professional women authors in the 17th century, many of whom were playwrights. There were around 150 published at the time. They wrote popular and important works of literature and supported themselves through their writing. Sorry, I lost my places. Tough for me. So this is often forgotten, until recently it has been anyway. Indeed, it's easy to think that women weren't allowed to do this until around 1960, but it's simply not the case. After the French Revolution, they were systematically written out of the French literary canon over the course of the 19th century. Perry and his co-editors have been working to edit, translate, annotate, and publish these texts to make them available to contemporary readers, and thus recover these important lost literary voices. The translations they produce, and this translation and edition is fundamental to the work we do, because texts that are edited and translated are texts that are read and commented. The translations they produce end up in literature courses throughout the English-speaking world, and the French editions are handed around to graduate students soon after they become available for dissertations in places like Harvard, Penn, and the Sorbonne. And a recent article in the New York Times mentioned his influence on French scholars, and a mention in the Times is huge for us. We don't get a lot of press. So. And since this is about an academic work, I'm going to quote, so it's obligatory. So this is from the Times. When Dr. Avain started researching pre-revolutionary female authors around 2000, she quickly realized that French academics were behind their American peers. In the early 1990s, Perry Gethner, a professor of French at Oklahoma State University, had already translated plays by François Pascal, Catherine Bernard, and other 17th and 18th century women into English and published them. He was an excellent teacher, and he has taught all levels of French, as well as honors classes. His students were impressed by both his learning and the energy he brought to the classroom. And his head, I got to read some of his evaluations, so I can vouch for this. And I can say that he had a following among some of our smartest and most successful alumni. He was a helpful mentor and a very dependable colleague. You could always ask him for help. Always a source of good advice and information. He was an enthusiast of all types of performance, so this spilled over into his personal life, especially opera, and an accomplished pianist, something that I have especially appreciated on several occasions when I was organizing induction ceremonies for our Spanish Honor Society. He would play. So he was one of the most dedicated and hardworking professors I've ever known, and truly the best of us. I've met very few people with as much intellectual curiosity as Perry had, and he will be greatly missed in the department. Thank you.
And may I invite Dr. Michael Ravens.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming here today. My name is Michael Ravens. I am a faculty member at Oklahoma State University, and I'm a member of this congregation. But I'm here today because I'm Perry's friend. Perry has been my friend for the past 18 years, ever since I got to Oklahoma. He was my introduction to everything Jewish and everything musical in this part of the state. He was the one who brought me here to this temple for the first time. And one day when I happened to be absent, he was the one who made me vice president. That'll teach me. Now, I realize many of you have known Perry longer than I have. But in a certain sense, I think I have known Perry longer than I have. We both come from the same place, you see. We both grew up in the same neighborhood on the north side of Chicago, a place called Hollywood Park. We both went to the same public grade school, Peterson Elementary School. And we both went to the same Hebrew school at Congregation Shari Tikva. Perry always liked to tell me that in the year that followed his bar mitzvah, he took private lessons from the principal of our Hebrew school, whose name was Dr. Liebenson. And my mother always likes to remind me that when we moved into our house on Central Park Avenue some 60-odd years ago, Dr. Liebenson lived on our block, just a few doors down. So I imagine that the teenage Perry Gethner must have walked back and forth past my house dozens of times when I was too young to realize it. Now, what was Perry studying with Dr. Liebenson? He was learning to become a Torah reader. And we all know that Perry became an expert in that most difficult of synagogue skills. How many times have I watched him right here on this platform, on this bima, display his talents? And most of the time, when I was here, he asked me to come up and stand next to him to serve as the gabbai. The gabbai is the person whose job it is to follow this text in a printed book, while the Torah reader reads from the handwritten scroll. And I've got to be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen. The job of the gabbai is to make sure that the Torah reader doesn't make any mistakes. But when I assisted Perry in that position, I might as well have been the Maytag repairman. He was just that good. He never made any mistakes that I could catch. I wondered if he ever made any at all. Yes. So I want to say that in that and so many other ways, I'm grateful that Perry has been my friend for the last 18 years. And although I could wish that I had another 18 more, I think I'm very lucky that I got as much as I did. And I especially think this way because I know that the number 18 is a very special, lucky number in the Jewish tradition. We like to play games with words and numbers so that we assign a numerical value to each letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And the two Hebrew letters which add up to the number 18 are the letters Yud and Chet. If you switch those letters around, they spell the Hebrew word Chai, which means life. Life is a supreme value in the Jewish worldview, and everything connected with that, with the concept of life, and with the number 18, assumes a special symbolic significance. And not just the number 18. All the multiples of the number 18 have special significance as well. And the one that gets the most attention of all is the number 36, or double 18. There is a mystical tradition that goes back to the Talmud, which holds that the world is sustained because of the merits of 36 righteous people who live on this earth at all times. The two Hebrew letters that add up to 36 are the letters Lamed and Vav. So we call the members of this righteous circle the Lamed Vavniks, or the 36ers, perhaps. These Lamed Vavniks are unknown to themselves. They are unknown to each other. And of course, they are unknown to the rest of us. But I dare say if there is one person in our generation who's worthy of being counted among the 36 Lamed Vavniks, it would be my friend Perry. He did so much for so many. He did so much for this community. He sustained this temple practically all by himself for more than 37 years. And that's 36 plus 1. Yes. If I am correct in my assumption, then I am sure that the Rabbeinu Shalom, the master of the universe, is hard at work right now looking for a replacement for Perry so that the world will not be short one Lamed Vavnik. I'm sure he can do that, but I'm not so sure that I can find a replacement for my dear friend Perry. I shall miss him for the rest of my days. If I found any consolation in this sad time, it has been contemplating the nature of language. We all know how much Perry loved languages, and we can be sure that his two favorite languages were French and Hebrew. It occurred to me that in each of these languages, when it is time to say goodbye, the words that we use contain no implication that something is coming to an end. Instead, the words that we use look forward to our next meeting in the future. In French, we say au revoir, which means till the next time we see each other. It's almost a toast to the future. In Hebrew, we say lehitraot, which means the same thing. And so today, I cannot and I shall not say goodbye to my dear friend Perry. Instead, I will simply say, au revoir, mon cher ami, lehitraot. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric and Michael. From the Oklahoma City Jewish community, may I call on Dr. Martin Levine.
Well, I don't think I can be as eloquent as some of the speakers this afternoon. I grew up, I think like Perry, in a modern Orthodox Jewish home in Glasgow, Scotland. And I came with my wife and family to the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center as assistant professor in 1976. We settled in Norman and joined Hillel. And it was at Hillel that I learned to line, although I'd done a little of it as a student while in the University of Glasgow. I started to read the Torah, the traditional portion of the Torah, for each Shabbat from a Torah scroll. And I started to read it at Emmanuel Synagogue in 1988. I don't remember when Perry first read there, but I think that it was in late 1990s or early 2000s. But the one thing I do remember is that he was introduced as a friend of Rabbi Shalman, who had come about 20 years ago to 20 years before him, in 1981, I think, to Emmanuel Synagogue, and had since moved on. And now, thanks to some of the speakers here, I know that it was in Yale, because that's where I remember also Rabbi Shalman also had started his career. Reading the Torah perfectly, as we've already heard, I discovered that was one of Perry's many strengths. And it was clear to me that he was exceptionally good at it and had received a great Hebrew education, as we've heard. The primary rule of a good reader for Shabbat and Yom Tov is to read every Hebrew word correctly and follow the chanting melody correctly. And Perry always did that so well and so beautifully every time. Reading directly from a scroll, I can assure you, having done it many times myself, is no easy task. The script is Hebrew letters only, just the letters. But it's more flowery, and sometimes it's individual. Each scroll is just a little different, and sometimes the words come to run together, and it's very difficult to actually get them right. And there's no punctuation marks, and there's no chanting marks, and there's no stopping place either, very often. So a reader must practice again and again. Since each portion is read only once a year, you have to keep lining for a few years to become fluent. And Perry was very fluent. Soon, though, we became great friends, and occasionally I would invite him to Norman to share Shabbat lunch with me and my wife, Laura. And there, in addition to singing voice, we found that he was also an excellent pianist. And once he spontaneously sat down at our piano and played one of the movements of a Beethoven sonata for us. Well, that was quite a shock, actually. I didn't expect that, and he didn't warn us. Perry had a great tenor singing voice, and of course, and when he first came, he was often asked to conclude the service with Musaf, the additional service after lining. Eventually, he offered to give us a talk in the Sedra, the weekly portion that we read in Shabbat. Sometimes it became a talk on other topics of general liturgical interest. In one such talk, Perry described why the Shabbat and Yom Tov silent prayers, the Amidot, had to be constructed differently from the weekday one, which is very simply 19 requests to God for various duties of life. Not just necessarily Jewish duties, just duties. For example, that you have wisdom. One cannot do that in Shabbat, though, or Yom Tov, because it states in the Torah that God rests with us in Shabbat. So that the ancient rabbis had to change the content. And what Perry talked about was the rationale for the changes that we see today in our Seder, in our prayer book. Perry had a vast knowledge of Jewish sources, which he enjoyed sharing with us at Emmanuel in Oklahoma City, as he did here at this Emmanuel in Ponca City. And his talent for communicating that knowledge were something that we in Oklahoma City, Emmanuel Synagogue, came to appreciate over the many years that he participated in our service. I personally will especially miss him as a longtime friend and colleague, and someone that I could always rely on to pick up a reading if I became unavailable. Perry, for me your memory will always be a blessing. Zichron Livracha.
May I call on Helene Hartman?
Tough acts to follow. Very tough, and I've been crossing out things that other people have said. And anyone who knows me will not be surprised when I tell you I lost the second page. I guess I left it at home. But Perry, as you've seen, Perry was everything. So I am Helene Hartman from Oklahoma City, and I am a member of the morning Shabbat service that meets at Emmanuel Synagogue. And I think that I'm as regular as most. And I find it ends and starts my whole week. Emmanuel Synagogue is very fortunate that we have 3 professors, one from OSU of blessed memory and 2 others from Norman, who constantly volunteer their time and expertise to help us in our service. And when I would come in, and I'm wearing this sweater because Perry was not a coat and tie kind of person. He had these sweaters, okay, some better than others, but he always had a sweater, and I'm wearing this to honor his sartorial taste. So if there were a Perry Gethner fan club, I would be president. I don't know when I first met Perry, but we had a mutual admiration society. He was an enthusiastic teacher, and I was an eager learner and cheerleader. Perry was the best Torah reader I've ever heard. He had a wonderful voice, clear and precise. His Hebrew was smooth, confident, and you knew he understood every word he was chanting. And he thought about the portion and its ramifications. When he gave a Devar Torah, a lecture or a learning on the portion that he had read, it would always be something new, and he would challenge the standard, generally accepted interpretations with more than his learned opinions. He would quote from scholars and commentators, agreeing with some, but mostly coming up with a unique, exciting new twist. It was obvious to all of us that he enjoyed teaching us and even welcomed a davar acher, another point of view, looking at his interpretations. One of Perry's insights, which I vividly remember, is how he expanded the story of the Exodus by showing us how the Jews in Egypt were not really some underclass, all slave labor, isolated in a specific part of the country. More likely, our ancestors had risen to be part of an integrated middle class, and slavery at that time was not what we think of today as a full-time job, but rather a part-time obligation. What a different lens I now look through when I see the Haggadah on my table. Perry was also willing to share his talents at all kinds of venues. The evening that Emmanuel Synagogue honored Martin Levine and Fred Poplin, Perry came in and sang a parody for us. Not exactly what you would expect of a scholar, PhD, Phi Beta Kappa, but he loved to play all kinds of roles. He taught and acted for a Purim party for our Torah study class. He led a Seder in Chickasha for Eleanor Miller and friends. He gave learned concerts and lectures for all of us at Oklahoma State University. I even remember a lecture he gave at the University of Oklahoma debunking some secret message. Some guy had come up with that the Torah has secret messages if you move the letters over to one square or another square. Anyhow, it didn't take Perry long to tear that down. Perry may have had no in his vocabulary, but I never heard it. God bless you, Perry.
Thank you, Helene and Martin. Without belaboring the point too long, I would like to share Devar Torah that Perry gave, just a small insight. I'm a nerd, and I loved the there isn't enough space to carry the tabernacle without there being a system of crates and ox carts. Or Benjamin could not possibly have had all of those wives and children, and here's why. Or the minutiae of grammar that I could listen to every minute of every day, or the pride I took in putting him in touch with my biblical grammar professor and watching them be smart at each other online. Many people who are raised very traditionally in Jewish tradition can read the text very closely and look at details and traditional commentaries. But many traditional commentaries are not good at seeing the humanity of certain characters. And he gave a beautiful talk about the failings of our forefather Judah, and how his failings as a father traumatized his sons, led to the terrible problems with his daughter-in-law Tamar and the tragic deaths of two of his sons. Treated as gentle but matter of fact, he viewed this as an abusive family dynamic with sons who were driven to self-harm. And when I said, God, Perry, this is beautiful but gutting, what led you to think that Judah is a monster? And he just said, he tried to murder his daughter-in-law. Did you miss that part in the text? Those of us with a traditional yeshiva education don't often get the violence against women section. We have to add that ourselves. But someone who could take a text as deeply weird as the Judah and Tamar cycle and just calmly and gently introduce such difficult, weighty topics with such sensitivity and such care and such emotion, weaving together his academic skills, his religious skills, and his heart. It was beautiful, and it was a lesson for me not to allow those things to be segmented when we talk about the Torah. And El Malei Rachamim, the Jewish prayer of memorial and of memory. El Malei Rachamim shochen b'meromim, Hamtzei menucha nechona tachat kanefei hashechina, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים. את נשמת פנחס בן מאיר ושרה רחל שהלך לעולמו, בגן עדן תהי מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Dr. Perry Gethner, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say Amen. Amen. Although we are not doing the burial here, I would like to do an interpretation of Tziduk Hadin, the righteousness of judgment, which is generally said by family at the graveside. God, the perfect rock, whose work we perceive reveals a faithful God, true, upright, and honest. The rock is perfect in every way. Dare we ask God to account for any deed? God rules below and on high, causing death, giving life, bringing down to the grave, but raising up as well. The rock is inscrutable. Dare we question, what have you done, when God's every word comes to be immediately? The rock is unfathomable, but just and patient, and filled with compassion. God, have pity for parents and children, as forgiveness and compassion are yours. You are just, Adonai, in the giving and in the taking. In your hand is the essence of all spirit. You would never permit the impact we made to fade. So consider us keenly, for you are the master of compassion and forgiveness. Were a mortal to live but a single year, or even 1,000, it would not seem enough. We therefore praise the God of truth, who takes, but who also gives life. We know, Adonai, that your discretion is beyond us. We know, Adonai, that your word is good, but your judgments at times puzzle us. And though we may brood over harsh realities, we place our trust in your righteousness and accept our lot, our loss, and the love that remains with us forever. Have mercy upon us and strengthen us to maintain our courage at this time of sorrow. Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, yihi shem Adonai mevorach. Adonai has given and Adonai has taken. Praised be the name of Adonai. I would like to invite all those who are present to rise for Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemeh rabah ve'alma divera kiru'utech v'yamlich malchutech b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael ba'agala uv'izman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yeheh shemeh rabah mevarach le'alam ul'alem me'almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitale v'yithalal shemeh dekud shabarichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yeheh shalama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'maromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru. Amen. As we go forth from this place in our sorrow and our sadness, and in our desperate need of those around us, we take it upon ourselves to say a version of Kaddish for Perry. Mourner's Kaddish reserved traditionally for family, but there is another way of saying Kaddish for people. To quote them, to say what they taught you, to repeat the things that they have given you and the lessons that you have learned from them. Perry's fire was bright, and it will take all of us to burn as brightly in return. May his memory be for a blessing.